Failing does not make you a failure. Failing is one of the things that people fear the most, and some people even go to the extent of not even trying to do anything because they are afraid that they will fail. And I used to think that I should never fail because failing is a disgrace. It's a stain in my name, in my life. But over the years, I learned that in the long run, failing is an essential process of being a better person. And after I repeatedly failed in my life, I can confidently say that failing does not make you a failure. I think failure can be divided into two groups, two things. The first one is primal fear. It's like when there's a tiger or a snake in front of you and you feel afraid. That's natural because your life is on the line and it's either fight or flight, right? But if we really think about it, most of the things that we fear, they don't really endanger our lives. They're not really that dangerous. What we often fear in our daily life is what I would call, or I read, intellectual fear. It's something that we made up in our mind because we're so smart, because human is, we always want to adapt, we always want to avoid the things that scares us. And it's things like being scolded by your boss, or things like being afraid of trying to start a YouTube channel. Those problems are things that we made up because our mind is uncomfortable with a situation. So I think the reason why we have the fear of failure, is because we overthink the possibility. We create some scenarios of failure, and that's what we are afraid of. We are afraid of the scenarios that we made up in our mind. It's not happening yet. Most probably it will not happen. It might happen, but at the time, it's just possibilities of failure, and it's just scenarios that we will fail. It's not yet a reality. So our fear of failure starts because we overthink about failing. As an adult, it seems like failure is not an option because other people are always judging us, and sometimes we care too much about what people think, so we stop doing things that would embarrass us in public. And that's why some people stop trying at all. They're just following the flow. They're alive, but I don't know if they're actually living. So remember when you were learning to ride the bicycle, or when you first learned to tie your shoes? I think we should just treat failure as something simple. As kids, we learned because we were being honest. We didn't know how to do something, so we learned. We failed, but we learned. And finally, we can ride a bicycle. Finally, I can tie my shoes. And so on. I think making mistakes was the only way for us to know how things worked. when we were kids. So I was wondering if it's common for us to fail as a kid. Why is it not common for adults to fail? What makes us think that adults should have it all figured out? What makes us think that adults should be right all the time? I think if when I think about it that way, I realize that I failed many times as a kid, as a teenager, as well as a young adult, and I turned out all right. I'm not dead. I'm not. I'm nothing I was afraid that I would be. So I think you should at least try. Trying brings you 2 steps forward, and failing brings you 1 step backward. So while it's still going to take you back 1 step, you're not in the same place anymore because you learned something. You know how to do it the wrong way. So you're not going to repeat the same mistakes. And once you learn that failing is just as important as learning, as progressing, as everything else in life, you'll start to take failures as part of your process. It's just a part of life. It's just something that we have to do if we want to be a better person, if we want to achieve our dreams, if we want to move forward. But I'm not saying that you should just fail and forget. Take some time to process your feelings, take some time to collect your thoughts, and once you're calmed down enough, it's time to move on and move forward. I think not failing is a failure in itself. So make mistakes, try a lot of things, be a kid, and learn from your failures. I hope you find this insightful. Remember, it's not going to be easy, but it's not impossible.